We ask that you would please come into this meeting, Lord, that you will open up hearts, open minds, let us receive something from you, Lord, that will help us as we journey forward and minister to your people. Bless all that are in attendance. And we give you praise, honor, and glory in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. Well, as we said before, so this is the third session of this cohort capacity building training, and I believe that the first two were awesome. The first meeting was led by none other than Minister Lisa Diane White, and she gave us the basics. She gave us the basics, and it was very engaging. She had a very engaging way of doing that. And then Brother Driffith came to us last week, and he spoke to us about stigma, and that was a very engaging conversation as well. And today is not going to be any less. And so today we're going to be talking about incorporating faith values and spirituality in community programming. I'm not even going to bother to try to break that down. I'm going to leave it to our facilitator today, who's going to be Lisa Diane White. And of course, we know Lisa Diane White to be a womanist theologian and is very progressive in her theology. She's a social activist, and she protects social justice with her entire heart. And I will say, just from my small interaction with her, she's an advocate for love. She is concerned about the Black community, but primarily she focuses on Black women in the community and with regards to their health issues. She is a minister. She attends Unity Fellowship Church, and she has her master's degree in public health. And so we welcome Minister White once again to navigate through this interesting topic. And so over to you, Minister White.
Well, hello, good people. I'm so glad to be here. And I wanted to start out the meeting. I know that when I had my session, there was a question that was left over, and I wanted to make sure that we addressed the questions that were left over. And so one of the questions was, is there an age limit for PrEP? And what I find is that there is an age limit in the sense of that the research was done on those 16 and up as far as adults, but they made some decisions around the fact that if you weighed 77 pounds, that you could still take the medicine PrEP. If you still, as far as Descovy is concerned, the second medicine that has been discovered, it still does not include cisgender women and or transgender men. So you wanted to know if there was age limit. The age limit is 16 years old. And if there's any risky, rather, as we look at sex that may expose you to the transmission of HIV, depending on some of those activities, you can be prescribed PrEP if you're under the age of 16, but you still have to weigh at least 77 pounds. Any further questions on that particular one? And then there was another question that I understood that happened that was about whether or not we felt that, let's see, I forgot the questions I quit. We talked about because there are two forms of PrEP I wanted to make sure we knew, Truvada, and that's in both adults and adolescents weighing at least 77 pounds. And for Descovy, that is different. And then there was another question, what makes someone, I believe the word is, what makes you unable to transmit HIV? So what is an undetectable viral load? What does that mean? And so an undetectable viral load has to be done by a doctor, a blood test. And then that will be able to tell you whether or not you have enough HIV in your body to transmit. And so that is something that you have to have done in a doctor's office. It's not something that people just walk around with a number saying, you know, I have an undetectable viral load. There are many things that can impact your viral load, including just shifts in medication. Sexually transmitted diseases can impact your viral load. So it is something that typically is tested every quarter. And then if you've had an undetectable viral load for maybe about 2 years, they may be testing you twice a year to see if your viral load is undetectable. And with the advances in many of the medications, if you're taking them properly, the viral load will probably continue to stay undetectable. So when we talk about adherence, that means you need to take your medicine properly and each and every day. And even if there's some fluctuations, depending on what that might be, a day or miss something, but that will not impact your viral load. So are there any questions left over from the information that I just shared with you? No question. And please let me know, because when we send out the information, my email is attached to that, and I can always share more information with you. We can share websites. We can share, sources where we, good something. We all can Google, and I would suggest that if you're Googling, Google multiple sources. I would say scroll down before you pick the first two. Those are typically the ones who pay to get that top dollar, and they may not be answering what you need. But if you scroll down, you can find question after question. How old do I have to be? What does it mean? What does this mean? Just keep reading and asking questions, and just make sure you get it right. And if you don't know anything, just let the people know you don't know, and that you will get back to them, or else you could say, let's look it up together. So you don't have to know everything, but what you do have to do is be open to saying you don't know something and then looking for the answer with each other. There's no harm in not knowing everything. Matter of fact, if you know everything, there's no need for you to come, and because you're not even, human. So at this point, I would invite you to show up in your full transparency of I don't know anything, and I would love to be able to learn together. And I see that Reverend Nadine has said, yes, those first 2 or 3 may say sponsored ads. And so, like I said, you pay to get that top positioning. And so you may get information that is particularly directed towards somebody's product or what have you. So if you scroll down further, and there's just places you can ask your doctor, you can read pamphlets, you can go to informational website, government sites, pharmaceutical sites, but everywhere you go, there may be something specific. Like if you go to the pharmaceutical site that makes the medication, you're going to get a specific, these are the people who've done the research, so they will show you what they've learned in the research. They'll also tell you about new research that is currently going on. So say like with one of the drugs, cisgender women, Descovy, and transgender men cannot take that drug right now, but there's ongoing research, to determine whether or not women may be able to maybe cisgender women and transgender men will be able to take that drug for PrEP as well. And so, and it's continued advocacy and education that brings things to the light. And so by the time there's research that doesn't include certain people, it is advocates such as you and I who may make a difference by saying, hey, why is this not available to me? And I would like to have it made available to me. And why did you skip our community? And then, people have to start giving you answers. And our esteemed colleague, Tori Cooper, has put in a sheet about the undetectable viral load as well. And sometimes they may use language that you don't know what it is. And so this is just simply, we are being exposed to new language, and it's just going to become language that's we have to get familiar with in this cohort to roll it around on our tongues until we get used to saying it, understand what it means. And so I've been asked to discuss the difference between PEP and PrEP. PrEP, PR, that small p, PR is pre-exposure. You take this before you make a decision about having sex. Now, this is not something you can say, oh, I met somebody today, I got a little hookup, let me pop this pill, or let me go get this quick shot, or let me do something. This is something you have to think about. So when I talked about you take this before you are going to be exposed to anything. You don't know you don't know your status maybe currently, you don't know. So that means if you go to get PrEP, then they have to test you to see whether or not you have been exposed to HIV, and then you can take it. You need to be HIV negative to take pre-exposure prophylaxis. If you are a man, transgender woman, then you, a cisgender man or a transgender woman, then you can take this drug for 7 days, and then you will have, you know, appropriate exposure. If you are a female, cisgender female, or transgender man, you need to take the drug possibly for up to 21 to 28 days. And so these are not casual decisions, but it's something that you can take. If someone says, you know, there's a pill or a shot you can take to prevent HIV. And what we've learned is that these things have been effective if you are taking it properly. And it's more effective if you are taking the shot. But again, it's not available to cisgender women and transgender men. Post-exposure prophylaxis, you've been exposed. You like, oh, the condom broke. I didn't ask any questions. I think I might have been exposed. I don't know. So you can go to the emergency room, you can go to urgent care, you have to go somewhere because you need to get a prescription. And this is something that can be used if you've been exposed via sexual assault of any kind, any types of assault, you've been exposed to HIV, and then you take a 28-day regimen of a combination of pills of HIV medications, and this may also prevent your exposure. Now, what I've noticed is that we are putting things in the chat. And so what I'd like for you to do is go to the chat. And if you are inside the chat, is everyone in the chat, can they see these websites that have been posted? If you cannot, raise your hand or just let me know. Give me some kind of sign.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, now you see down there at the bottom, you see a little smiley face and you see 3 little dots. Anybody see those 3 little dots?
Yes.
When you hit those 3 little dots, it says save chat. And then you can save the chat to your computer or your phone. If you're on the phone, I'm not quite sure how it will work, but I know if you're on the computer, you can save the chat and then you can come back to these. And if you cannot, I'll save the chat. And again, we'll have these websites that are available to you. I'm also taking a screenshot. If you don't know how to do that, you can hit that little down at the bottom of your screen. You might see 4 little squares that look like a window. You hit that and you hit print screen, and it'll take a picture of what you're looking at. It'll take a screenshot, and then you can find that on your computer as well. Okay. And if we need further instructions, I'll come back to you. And so now we're ready to begin our discussion. And today, it will be a discussion. I will give some information, but this is something that you're so welcome, Dr. Sarita. And this is something that I'd like for us to understand that, you know, in this conversation that we're ready to talk about some things. And Tori, one of the things I was excited about is that you had sent us an article about resiliency. And you talked about whether or not that might be something that we might incorporate. So as we move through this conversation, I'd like to make sure, as we're looking at resiliency and what does that mean in terms of what can we do as a community to protect ourselves that are community-based. You know, what do we do as a community that brings each of us into, you know, a conversation about protective factors of a community versus these individual places that we talk about the prevention of HIV. So this will come up further in the conversation, and I will invite you. So today, y'all, we're looking at, this is capacity building session number 3. And we are incorporating our faith, our values, and our spirituality and community programming. So what does that mean? Each of us received a grant based on the fact that we applied based on, this is a faith and value. So this roundtable invited us to build capacities of religious institutions to have meaningful involvement with persons living with and impacted by HIV in the state of Georgia. Now, this is what we applied for. And it was religious institutions. Now, we did not, you had to specify what your religion was. There's no assumption that any of us may be Christian or that we may be Muslim or that we may worship or Jew. You have to decide what that is. And in this discussion, we are inviting you to bring in your theological perspective. So we're starting out here with faith and value. So faith. It's been defined as complete trust or confidence in someone or something strong, a belief in a doctrine of a religion. It could be based on a spiritual conviction, and you may not have proof. It's you just believe it with your whole heart. You may have proof, but typically, this is what faith is. It is based on a conviction. Values. What do you value? It's something that you hold to deserve the importance, the worth, or usefulness of something, the principles or standards of behavior, one's judgment. And I want you to see that word, your judgment, is what you decide what is important in life. Having a good understanding of your spiritual teachings, and these may relate to your audience that you choose that you've chosen, is important. It's important to know people have already experienced stigmatizing behaviors at faith institutions, and I'm not naming them because I don't know what they are. You will. So when we're talking about this, you might need to be prepared for resistance. And when we're talking about resistance, what may have happened to us? What may have harmed us? What may have happened to us in these faith institutions? Because as many of you may know, that there have been places that we as a community may have been harmed, and we are looking for you to be able to understand what those experiences might be and how they may protect your community or how they may harm your community. So we're getting ready to talk about decolonizing the Black body. So now we're talking about this Black church. Now, are we talking about the Christianity Black church? Or are we talking about the Black church where you gather? And the church has been heralded as a hub of religious and social, political, and economic activity in our communities. And as a few of the institutions that has been consistently funded by Black folks, we fund these churches. We fund these places where we congregate. And they have functioned as a theological or cultural repository. It means they hold our good information and what we believe, our social refuge, our advocates for equity and justice, and a conduit for communal wealth. But some congregations and historically Black denominations have also struggled amid tensions about the biblical word and some of our social and human realities. And so the Black Religious Roundtable is using this theory, the decolonization of Black bodies, to turn the conversation away from harmful theological and biblical debates. We're talking about a new kind of conversation around resiliency and how might we as a community shine a new light on the important protective factors that decrease HIV/AIDS incident and help save lives in this African-American community. Now, there's levels of decolonizing, and the first one that we look at is survival. And it's a one-dimensional approach, y'all. This is what resiliency talks about, these one-dimensional approaches, such as protection-only HIV strategy. We give out condoms and dental dams. Now, these barrier methods are important tools, y'all, in preventing the spread of HIV. We had a whole conversation about how condoms can prevent the transmission and acquisition of HIV. But in a conversation about you and your body in a communal sense, it may not be the best tool for you at the time. So we taught there's placement, removal of condom materials, the types of sex that you're having. We talked about anal sex, vaginal sex, oral sex. We talked about the body fluids that pass those things. But at the end, the conversation still goes back to a singular focused strategy when we're talking about the reduction and the prevention. And sometimes when we are focusing only on that strategy, it can be ineffective in terms of reducing the risk of HIV. Now let's talk about recovery. It's like, how do you recover from a setback? How do you go back to this state of normalcy? So in the context of this discussion, what is normal? And normal is present in the form of instruction or education. So that means to be instructive, it means that you've got to have enough experience and information so that you can act on that information. You're not reacting, but you can act on it. And this is this is what we've been instructing. That's what we did. But these HIV education strategies, they're guided by theory. There are many theories that these things talk about, and they may be based on your cognitive behavior, what you believe, what your mind can hold, what is your health beliefs, what does your faith believe, what are some of your cultural norms. And so there's a limitation when we're talking about theory that is driven or evaluating in a framework that minimizes the importance of the context of where you live, work, and or play or socialize. Then we're looking at level 3, development. Now, this is the combination of the information, the skills building, and the use of protective methods that allows us as individuals to gain knowledge and create skills that increase our safer sex practices. You just got to practice it. I talked to you about condoms, but I didn't show you how to use them. Sometimes people need to know how to use them properly. Now, these are approaches that can facilitate your ability around your sexual relevance, and they are generic in their knowledge base, so they lack a cultural grounding. Who is your community and who are your people? Did the words I used offend y'all? Could you hear anything after what I said? Did I bring it to you in a way that you could get it? And did you like the games? And you like the games and you like the participation. Some folk, are offended simply by the very nature of the use of the word. So where they may be helpful in mediating HIV rates, they may not allow individuals to see their sexual choices in the context of their culture and historical things that may have happened to them. And so now we go to level 4, self-determination. We've seen these words sometimes in the use when we've been talking about, kuchachakalia, self-determination. We look at, what is placed at the center of HIV education. So as we look at the principles of Kwanzaa, we learned some of these words, but in the African community, but what is the issue that may socially transcend some of the way we talked about HIV to issues of non-judgmental affirmations and definitions of your sexual rights, your behavior, and your practice of non-harmful acts of self-love? And who decided what is a non-harmful act? And who has the conversation of what harms you and what holds you? So we have to talk about issues of healing, decolonization, transformation, and mobilization, y'all. And it has to crystallize in the face of the historical struggle of how we talk about the ownership of the Black body and its offspring. How do we own the bodies that we talk about? How do we own them and have these conversations in our Black communities? And then, do we own our bodies? I think that we have been seeing things in the media that has reminded us when we didn't own our bodies. Many of these memories are encoded in our DNA, and we struggle in some of these conversations. So we have to begin this discussion with ourselves. And so we are talking about incorporating these kind of decolonizations into your programs. So how do you do that? Many of you have heard some of the things that I have said. Do you have any questions about what I have been saying to you? Let me check this chat to be sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, no. Did anything stand out that you might want to question before we move into the discussion? Because I believe that the discussions that we have can support us in terms of how might we incorporate some of these conversations into our work. So when I talk about a discussion, now I'm talking about, what do y'all think? What do you believe? So I want to know, each of you belongs to an organization. How do you incorporate your specific faith teachings into the fabric of your community project? Now, mind you, you proposed the project, but how do you incorporate some of these things that you believe? Can anybody talk to me? I'm going to stop the share right now. So this question is up on the table. How do you incorporate your specific faith teachings into the fabric of your community project? Now I'm gonna move this discussion along, and I'm gonna call on a few people to help me who've been greatly influencing some of the conversations that I've been having this whole week looking at this issue. And so, Reverend Pratt, you are a part of this community that I belong into, and we had a conversation about how do we incorporate what we believe into the programming, and I was like, I didn't write this in, but then I realized that I introduced it in the application. And so can I put you on the spot and ask you some of the questions that we went over in terms of how are we thinking about incorporating what we believe at Unity into the program that we propose?
Definitely. Some of the things that we talked about was making sure that we incorporate the fact that God is love and love is for everyone. One of the things that we talked about last week on stigma, talking about a person who comes in and they are low self-esteem and having to redefine what self-love is. And so I believe that part of our program is to, just to start at that place, identifying places where we can re-identify what self-love looks like, to invite them into a space where they are loved by their peers, offering support systems. And so I think that's the starting place that we talked about. We also talked about making sure that the doors are open wide where there is no person that's left out, specifically, which is my passion, people with disabilities. A lot of times when we are talking about HIV and we talk about AIDS, a lot of people in the medical community does not take into consideration people with disabilities. A lot of things that are available are not discussed. One, and a false belief that people with disabilities are not sexual beings. And so those type of things, we have decided that we will be on the forefront and having those conversations, making sure that there is no one left out of the conversation, including people with disabilities. And our affirmation of our faith in itself, introducing that is inclusive, where we are going against some of the traditional translations of scripture that have in the past oppressed people, and we're opening that up and allowing people to voice their church hurts in ways of not using other terms, but church hurt is one of the things that have caused people not to come into faith communities. And so providing space so that we can have those type of conversation, which starts the healing process inside, which then we can then work on the healing of the Black body.
Okay. Now, one of the things that we've learned is that in the community, we've been charged as these interdenominational agencies to begin to talk about HIV. Now, what we've also learned is that when you begin to talk about HIV, there's a conversation that there's some beliefs around the fact that certain people get it. And who might be these certain people? Now, we talked about the places where transmission, we didn't look at rates across the board because I didn't want us to stigmatize groups of people. But when we begin to talk about HIV in a community, there are conversations about HIV. What are some of the things, when we think about some of our myths around who can get HIV? Can women get HIV? Is it just only is it something that's only in the white community? Is it something that is in our Black community? Is it in our Black community? Are we talking about same gender loving men? Do we talk about love in between two men in our faith communities? Are we able to have those conversations? If we're not able to have those conversations in our faith community, then that means we maybe cannot have these conversations in our programs that we are proposing. So I'm going to continue to call on you all to ask you what were some of the thoughts that you had, that you were thinking about when you proposed your program about what you will incorporate from your faith community. Does anybody like to raise their hand, or I can call on you?
If I could jump in very quick, we do have a couple of comments. And I know Dr. Sarita had asked, yes, what are the barriers to incorporate decolonization in the projects? And then Tori Cooper answers and says, Sarita, I would offer that a significant barrier is leaders come with their own experiences and believe that they are often rooted in shame and ignorance.
we could have a conversation about that. So as we begin to talk about, who's in that pulpit, who's the leader? So whatever the leader may think and believe, the leader then thinks and teaches. And then when the leader thinks and teaches, then the congregation learns and teaches themselves. So these are the models of community teachings that we have learned. And so, it's just like I grew up in a church, a Baptist church with my mom. And then when I joined Unity, I had different levels of thinking, that because some of the thinking that I had heard at the time, I found it to be some harmful practices, and they weren't things that I believed. And my mom was like, well, what happened to you? And I was thinking, what happened to y'all? Why y'all didn't question nothing? Why was I the only one questioning the things that I saw? Why were the only people up in front of the church apologizing for something were women? Did they get pregnant by themselves? What happened to the people who helped them get pregnant? Why are they not there? Why are you not asking this question, Mama? What's wrong with you? But at the same time, I'm a respectful child, but at the same time, I'm looking like this don't feel right. And I don't understand why this is being directed in ways, so if I'm offering of shame about something that I did, I can't, the person who did it with me, we're not there jointly, then what happens to our relationship? This is a place that immediately begins to impact your ability to educate someone. If the woman is the only person responsible for the protection of HIV and the transmission and the acquisition in a relationship, these are conversations we have to be able to talk about based on how we've been taught. Because if we're not holding everyone accountable for their bodies and their actions and their behaviors, then how do we talk about the protection if there's not a pattern of equally shared conversation around how do we protect ourselves as a couple in this church, or as a community, or as in this faith-based organization? Again, we're talking about this Immaculate Conception. We know that it happened in some Christianity story, that there was no male in the relationship when she was impregnated. Now, the rest of us have to look at, did that happen to us? We have to be able to talk about, if you got pregnant, how did it happen? And if you can't tell me how it happened, that means somebody didn't have a conversation with you. And why didn't they have a conversation with you? Because we don't talk about it. By the time I start talking about something, I say to y'all, don't put your pocketbook on the floor. Do you think I'm talking about your purse or your body? We got so many names of what we're talking about. Do you know what I'm talking about? And if you don't know how to talk about it, you can't name it. And if you can't name it, then you can't protect it. So you see how some of these values and beliefs and cultural things, they impact our ability. And as someone said, folk want to have fun. Can safer sex be fun? Can sex be fun? Is it just a chore, or is it just something you're supposed to do to procreate and have the family? And who's supposed to do it? And who can do it? And so if you're not a married person, then can I have a conversation with you about protection in the church? No, we're not going to talk about that if this is a conversation that you're not going to have. If there's homophobia in the church, what does that mean? There is fear and hatred of people who may be in same-sex relationship. That's called heteronormativity as well. Assuming that every conversation we're having, we're talking about heterosexuals. If we're not talking about heterosexuals, somebody's going to hell in some situation. And I mean, some people may not even believe in a heaven or hell or any of those things, but these are the conversations you need to have or understand how this impacts your ability to be able to have a program that begins to have these conversations. And what I'm learning is when we're talking about the cultural norms, whatever your religion is, there's still a cultural norm that helps you and shapes your beliefs. And it typically has come from the person that has been in that pulpit, or the leader, or someone that is leading your community. If those are the cultural norms and they become the ones that you talk about, if at any time you reject somebody in that community for any reason, how can they protect themselves if the very base that they have has unloved them? If there is no love from your community, your mama, your daddy, your church, your place of refuge, then how do you go in an individual situation and begin to offer protection when we as a community have already abandoned you and have not shown you any protection? These are the things we have to talk about. So when we talk about resiliency, how do we recover from those places? Sometimes, y'all, we don't recover. Everything can't be healed and everything can't be fixed. But sometimes we believe that because if we believe in certain ways, everything can be healed. Just turn it over to your higher power and you will have complete recovery. And if you don't, then you are not, you need to fast and you need to do some praying. So let's continue to have some conversation. So we're looking at the No More organization. We have a view on crystal healing, that historically to release the internal stigma and biases have been indoctrinated between cisgender women and trans building to build a bridge of understanding of healing so we can heal collectively. That means this way we have to be there for each other as women when it comes to understanding HIV and the transmission and what that looks like for us as women collectively, and hold each other accountable to make sure we are protecting ourselves. We're still debating what is a woman. And if we're having those debates, then that means there's no protectivity that is offered to whoever you deem is not woman. And if you cannot be protected by your community, we're going to send you out there with my HIV techniques and tell you to go protect yourself by yourself outside the community. And we're going to expect you to get it all by yourself. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But see, I just want us to think about these things. Now, I know I got a room full of people who can to speak, and I want to not take up the time. And I like the fact that y'all put in y'all chats. If you're not able to have the conversation, y'all writing it. But talk to me, Autumn Clay. Tell me what's going on. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I have an order here and I missed it. Can you forgive me? Can I start with you, Dr. Sonia? Bishop.
The only way. Very interesting. And I'm just sitting here wondering, because in our project, we do talk to religious organizations, faith-based organizations, and just thinking of different ways to be able to engage the conversation without offending embedded theology or entering into some sort of theological debate. And so I guess my mindset is around how exactly do we approach this, or should we just come into the conversation with generalizations and saying, hey, we're just giving you information, and how you choose to receive it is pretty much up to you. But we just want to come and share the general information that applies across the board to everyone, and without challenging. Well, we do want to challenge. There lies my conundrum. How do you challenge some of that bad embedded theology without entering into a whole theological debate that may consume most of the time and take away from our purpose of actually being in the room?
Right. And I'm not asking you at this point in time, we're not asking you, we asked you to propose program. You're not going, this is not about, can I convince you what I believe is what you should believe? But what I'm making clear to you, if you cannot come together in a conversation that invites the community to come together and love to show your program that we are inviting you in, come as you are. If you cannot do that, then you're going to miss the opportunity as a community to embrace and to educate. You are in an affirming ministry. You know plenty of people who don't understand what affirming means. Even in the community of affirming ministries, we differ on what liberation theology is. Right. We differ on what we believe and what we think, so we have to have some of those conversations. We're talking about these are hard conversations because if we as a community cannot decide what we will offer in terms of come as you are, the door is open. If there is any place where the door is closed to anyone, then you will miss an opportunity to bring someone in to help protect them. If you throw out somebody, where they gonna get a lifeline from? We're the ones who are supposed to be throwing out the lifeline. If we're debating who is worthy of being saved, then you will lose someone. And this is what we're talking about. Are we planning programs that are losing people based on our inability to, in our differences and in our doctrine and in our theology, that we will lose someone. Then if we make that decision, whether it be we differ, we can't even agree to disagree, because in the disagreement, somebody is lost. So when we're talking about a program, who are we deciding can be lost? And if we make those types of decisions based on the place in terms of how we move in our theology, someone will be lost. Okay, let's go to you, Autumn Clay. Thank you so much for bearing with me. You got to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry, I lowered my hand without unmuting. I'm Autumn Clay. I am here representing the faith community in Atlanta, Georgia. And one thing that stood out to me in the other conversation shared was the concept of love. And one of our pillars is the greatest commandment. And I think it's important to constantly center that amongst people, because when you're having these conversations relative to decolonizing and deconstructing specifically the Black body, a lot of people haven't even gotten to a place where they are able to wrap their heads around the intertwining of white supremacy culture and practices in their own faith. So I think it's important to understand, like, one, love of self, love of neighbor, and using that as your litmus in how you interact will kind of be helpful, because a lot of the populations that we're dealing with, like you said, are church harm, church hurt, people who have experienced great marginalization. And even if they are a person of faith and they want to connect, they still have that barrier because of the pain that they've experienced. So centering love and centering those conversations, and respecting the fact that even though we all are coming into this organization or this faith space, we all have different experiences. Like, me growing up Black Baptist is not the same as someone growing up, AME or Catholic, and our cultural expression is not uniform. So
Correct.
I see value in respecting where other people are, but I also think that we have to push back and identify the difference between discomfort and harm. And that's one thing that Christian always says. Like, when we look at the conversations, a lot of people are uncomfortable because it's challenging what they've been taught or what they've been, raised to believe. Whereas the other person, whether it's a trans person, anybody in the LGBTQ plus community, they've actually experienced harm unto death. So my discomfort is someone learning about something that is different from what I was raised on is not equivalent in any way, shape, or form to the danger that somebody is living in every day. So I think that we have to remember that when we have the conversation, like, it's uncomfortable. I've been decolonizing, deconstructing, in whatever way you want to call it, for years, but just because I'm uncomfortable with unlearning a theology, that doesn't negate that someone could die because my homophobia would rear its ugly head in terms of me questioning my faith or my religion.
And when you name any phobias, whether it be misogyny, heteronormative, homophobia, if you hate anyone, even unknowingly, these are the places where we're asking you to begin doing some of this interrogation. These are the conversations you all have been having. I'm pretty sure y'all had these conversations. You to do the work we're doing, we have to have these conversations, because we have to talk about the places where folk got dismissed, unloved, left behind in our communities. And we don't have to argue about the fact that we are showing up in love. If you have a conversation with me about who I can't love, then we cannot have a conversation about how we're going to talk about HIV in this community. There's just no way we can do it. If I can only talk to you about if you love this way, then I can help you. You've already let me loose. And so we talking about, you're not looking for no sheep. You didn't just send everybody out and ain't nobody coming for you. We need to be looking for the sheep, the lost sheep. And we're talking about resiliency in this community. We have the ability to do it. But y'all know this work is not easy. We've been doing it. We've been having these conversations.
Very
Can
true.
you talk to me, Reverend Nadine?
Yes. Thank you.
Good evening. One of the things that come to my mind as far as UCC churches and basically TFAM
because the tag is the radically inclusive love of Jesus. And as Autumn said, love being the showcase. If we are teachers and followers of Yeshua, Yeshua never turned anyone away. We can look at where the disciples tried to rush the children away, and he says, "Suffer the little children to come unto me." And we still have 50 and 60-year-old folks who are little children in Christ, where that church hurt cut off the growth. That love cut off the growth. That lack of love cut off the growth. And Yeshua was inclusive to everyone. Even when Martha got mad because Mary was sitting there being taught, what did he say? Mary has chosen the better part. So, male preachers, disassociate women from being in the pulpit when there were numerous female disciples. And Mary was right there at the foot being taught. So we have to bring forward those radical moments that of Yeshua that are talked about in the New Testament, to let people understand and come to know and believe and realize that Yeshua's love includes you wherever you are on your faith journey. It is you, and Yeshua loves you. And for folk who call themselves Christians, and I'm a student of the Torah, I said, let me tell you something. Yeshua didn't come for you. He came for the Jews to repent and return to the Torah. But there were a lot of Gentiles who caught on to what he was teaching and enjoyed and embraced what he was teaching. And not once have I discovered that Yeshua turned the Gentile away. So we have been turned away. I tell people I was conceived, born, and raised in the church. I wasn't turned away because I'm a lesbian. I was turned away because God called me to preach the word. And when I go home, there is no sitting in the pulpit. There's none of that. When I eulogized my dad, I had to eulogize him from the floor.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we as people who walk in the love of Jesus, we must be willing to show that radical inclusiveness and non-judging that Yeshua taught so much.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you, Reverend, so much. Everyone is making really great points, and I see you, Pastor Meredith, and I'm coming right to you. And then I just had as we go to Pastor Meredith, I do have a question for someone that can help me answer the question, and that is, in the Black church, or church, many people who've had church experiences have suffered from church trauma. And myself being same-gender loving, he certainly suffered from that. And so that we know that there are biases in the church, and if there are biases in the church for same-gender loving people, then if one were to identify as a person living with HIV or AIDS, then and therefore there's a bias against them as well. I remember one experience where we had a guest preacher that said that every gay person deserved the disease of HIV and AIDS and deserved to die. But we also know that the biases doesn't reside within the church, but we also know that biases resides in communities and cultures outside of brick and mortar, outside of the church and outside of faith. And so there are instances where faith must meet culture. And many of us here are leaders of faith. We are going to encounter biases not only in the church, but in the community. And so one of the questions I have, knowing all of this, and hearing all of the feedback we've gotten today, and that is within your programs and within your faith, how do you think that you will kind of address some of the biases we may see culturally and socially? Before I go to anybody else, I want to go to Pastor Meredith. So I know you hit your hand up earlier.
Okay,
Hello,
thank
Pastor.
you. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I guess I'm going to put a disclaimer out there first of all. I'm retired from pastoring, and in this disconnected state from the church in general, because I don't go to church anymore. My view is much different. And so I guess what I'm going to say is probably going to be challenging even for the church community. But as Dr. White was saying, these are hard conversations that must be had. And so I know that for those of us who've had some formal training in religiosities and Christianity as well, we know that the Black church is probably 40 years behind in its ability to navigate in this contemporary society in a healthy way. The white church is 20 years behind, and the Black church is 40 years behind. And I have dealt with the HIV community within the church for many years. But my concern now that if, to me, at this point, while I do think it has done a great deal of help for the Black community, I think it has done equally harm. For all the good it has done, it has been harmful at the same time. And I don't know that moving forward within using the conduit of the church to deal with HIV is an effective tool anymore. I think that it would benefit us to have more dialogue and conversation from the clinical perspective as well as the mental perspective as we approach this issue, because trying to get around the hatefulness of the church period is like climbing Mount Everest. Dr. Jamal Bryant went to, let me wrap this up, went to, of course, Division's Churches I Elevate conference and spoke, apologized for his hatefulness to the Black pulpit, to the Black community, apologized to me for how he treated me when I visited him in Baltimore. And then several mega Black pastors went to their pulpits and condemned him for the language he used, which to me at this point, these preachers are so ignorant to me. I just can't take some of this bull crap. But the fact that we're still using the church as a tool to reach such a marginalized community, marginalized gay people, marginalized HIV, but I mean, it's just going down the line and still is using this community. To me, I just don't think we're going to make the necessary inroads to even do the work we're trying to do by still using this backward institution, and this institution now that is failing us more now than it has in the past. Now, that's just my perspective. I don't know if we want to go down that conversation, but we as faith leaders have to also not be afraid to use language that we think offends God.
Yes.
You know, we had these fears. I was at a church in Milwaukee, and I'm done when I say this. I was at a church in Milwaukee visiting to do a friend of mine's birthday. When they asked me to do just a little comedy. So as I was leaving, doing my comments, I made a comment and I used the word niggas. Well, this older black woman came out of the church and pointed her finger at me and said, we had white people in our church, and that was so inappropriate for you to say the word niggas in front of white people. Now, it was a moment of comedic moment. It was all I could not to cuss that old woman out, because I told her, I'm not afraid of white people, and I don't believe in this slave mentality from this colonization that they gave us and made us afraid of them so that we can't say anything. What I'm trying to say is we cannot be afraid to even challenge our own theological ideas when it comes to the Christianity, if we're going to really make inroads with dealing with this, because even the Christian idea has some serious flaws in it as we approach this conversation about dealing with this issue in our community. That's my take on that. Okay.
And I appreciate that, which is where Bishop Rim began the conversation as well about the difficulties of having some of these conversations. And you said it yourself, you have to challenge some of this stuff. You have to challenge it as you hear it, because we can continue to talk about how 40 years we are behind, and we do, and we are. And I would dare say we further behind than that when it comes to many issues. But by the time we begin to have some of these difficult conversations, what we've learned and what you're learning is you're not going to keep arguing with some of these same foolish people. You're just not, because it's time for us to have some of we don't have time. Our communities are struggling and are at risk, and we cannot continue to give the stronghold to the naysayers. And so we know that the challenge is uphill. So by the time we begin to write these grants to talk about how might we address HIV in the church community, that means these are the conversations that we're having now, the harder conversations, because we have to get to HIV. We have to get to the conversation about what we need to do. We can talk about what we can't do, and we can talk about what we can do. And we are trying to move this conversation past the places that keep us from having these conversations. We're requiring to move in love. Even with the people that get on our first, and our third nerve, we still have to keep having these conversations, because what's going to happen? You've moved to a comedic area. You laughing at some of the places that we have done. It also requires people to look at some of the places that you're laughing at. Are you laughing, or are you still hurt about it? You still mad about it? You still irritated about it? But you have presented and put it all up there, and you making no apologies. And so what you're making clear to me, even as someone who has moved away from the church, you still got church in you. Mm-hmm. You still recovering, and you still teaching, and you still preaching. Whatever venue you use, and whatever venue you use is where we're going to do this work. You see me? Okay. Come on. Lydia Meredith, I see your hand.
Thank you, Pastor Bishop Dennis A. Meredith, for your comments and your unique perspectives. And I applaud your courage in this whole journey. And I appreciate your presence here on this call, along with the rest of the team, the Tabernacle team. Now, as Brother Bean reflected, we're dealing with audiences with so many intersections, and everybody on the call talked about the intersections that we deal with as we address cultural issues that have kept us enslaved. The intersection of gay and Black, lesbian and Black, transgender and Black. The fact that I don't remember the preacher's name that talked about the intersection of her call, her ministry, and being a lesbian and being Black. All of these intersections create a almost mind-boggling approach to how we're going to deal with so much difference, and how do we even approach. I don't believe, as Pastor Meredith said, that faith has to be the only conduit. We are going to have to use so many different kinds of ways to approach this healing. because of the diversity that we're facing in these audiences. And so I applaud the ITC vision to bring in an ecumenical team, to bring in faith, even non-faith, to a place where we have to deal with the issue of HIV, infection, and the stigma that's associated with sexuality. These are the kinds of things that we have to be intelligent enough to know that regardless to anybody's perspective, position, culture, or whatever the difference is, we have to respect those positions. And we have to learn how to listen. And we have to learn how to listen with empathy and listen with grace. And we all know that the church is the most ungraced place you can go to. But we as a community of ecumenical, this ecumenical body, we have to learn how to listen differently and how to approach this problem differently, because this is a huge problem to address. And thank you, Minister Lisa Diane, because your mind is wide open.
It's wide open.
It's got to be wide open to deal with this huge, tall, deep, and wide problem that we have here.
And this is the invitation.
And this is the invitation.
This is an invitation.
So everybody on this call, Miss Lisa said, we got a big job to do. We can't do it without open minds. We can't do it without open hearts. We can't do it without grace.
Right.
We can't do it without grace.
And grace is supposed to be unmerited.
I mean, grace reigns, the rain falls on the just and the unjust. That's the God grace. It's unearned. We
unmerited.
Can't earn it.
Yeah.
That's the kind of attitude. That's the kind of mindset we have to approach our audiences.
Right.
Right.
We're still talking about
we can't reach them with no phony, because the phony gonna come across.
Correct.
That phony energy will be conveyed.
This is
the invitation.
We got to have the grace embedded in our hearts and our minds and our spirits to be able to touch these audiences.
And any of us who grew up in this Christian community understand that grace is unmerited. That means you don't have to pay nothing for it, but we always got the card out looking for you to pay the cost. And what we're saying is that our community has already paid the cost, and you're asking us to come here with grace. We've paid the cost, y'all. We're dying because of the cost. We are dying. Our bodies are the cost. And what we're trying to do is interrupt that. And we're inviting you to have these conversations so that you can understand what is in the way. But you can have these conversations because these conversations help you understand where you in your own way.
Come on.
And then the invitation is, who else is in the way? We can't have no conversations about the doors open wide with a side door sending you out the back door. With the invitation where we're inviting you in, or who are you, or what type of, who are you? She, he, you see, some of us have pronouns. But then if you look at that, it's like in Gemini, you see she, he, and them. We've already seen that there's a non-binary conversation that we ain't been having because we don't want to talk about that. And so we want to have these conversations about all of us, the she, the him, the them, the everything.
That's it.
And if we decide who and what is not worthy of the conversation or the protection and the love from our community, then we are not worthy to talk about religion and anything that we believe in, because that's not a loving attitude. And we reject it. We need to reject it, y'all. That's all we got right now. And so you have asked us, Reverend Bean, about what will we do as we plan our programs. We will have these conversations with ourselves. We will have these conversations in these communities. The invitation is to continue a discussion, not just so we can hear ourselves speak, but so that we can do better.
Come on.
That's it. That's it.
We need to do better. If we write ourselves off as unable to save ourselves, then who's going to come for us?
Have mercy.
Who we looking for? As they said, we're the only ones we've been waiting on. And then invite your faith in to support you and gird you on this journey, y'all. And if you cannot do that, you cannot do this work. And if you wrote this grant, reconsider if you cannot do this. But this is the conversation. This is the charge. This is the need. This is the desire. What we gonna do, y'all?
Yeah.
Raise your hand if you want to, but you can't raise your hand and I can't do it. Because if you can't do it, if you can do it through humor, do it through humor. If you can do it in a conversation of just let me hug you, baby. If you're doing it, how do you call yourself? Let me call you that. Whatever you need to do, let them come in the door and tell you who they are and begin right there.
That's it.
This is good stuff. We have a comment, and the comment is from Reverend Nadine Rawls, and she's saying there are people who want grace, and the same ones don't want to give grace. And then so this has been very, very, I'm really enjoying everything that everybody is saying. So I've heard several approaches that many of you will have. We heard from my sister Alderman, she for TFC, she is saying that the greatest commandment is the center of, is going to be at the center of their approach. Love God first, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And then we enjoyed Pastor Meredith. I want to call you Pastor Meredith. I don't know if to call you Bishop Meredith.
Oh, that's
Meredith.
fine. That's fine.
The great Meredith, but
All of the above.
all of the above, Meredith. I don't know what to call you. So in my mind, you're still big. So I just can't call you Meredith all by itself. But you say, which is interesting, you're saying maybe we're at a place where we need to lead clinically as to why with Minister Lisa Diane White is so passionate about doing the biological and the clinical terms and approaches with HIV, because then in your community, in your program, you may lead with an educational, informative, clinical perspective, because you may find that there are, in your community, there are a whole lot of biases. But then we heard from Dr. DeBee, Lydia Meredith, was speaking of empathy. You know, and empathy, and in her program, or in the programs that she's going to be a part of, is really understanding the community at large and what they need, and lead with the arm of compassion. And then we heard from Minister Lisa Diane White talking about grace. So so what I'm hearing is that already with many of our programs, we have identified our spiritual place, or theological place. We understand our environment in which we operate, and we understand and know that we may approach each environment differently. We are at the hour of 7:15, and so we do.
Is that our closeout time, Reverend Bean?
No. It's at 7:30. But I just wanted to give a clock in, and so just in case there are other individuals that do want to chime in at this moment and
I
speak.
do see a hand, Reverend Bean.
Okay, and we see from
Amina Robinson.
Yes. Amina?
Hello?
Yes, good
Okay.
evening, everyone.
Good evening.
First, I definitely want to apologize for my lack of being on camera. I'm on my phone right now, and for some reason, it's not allowing me to come on camera. I had to be in the car during this particular session. But the conversation has been very rich. I am representing Egbe Obatala Atlanta, which is a Orisha and Ifa community, and the place that we are choosing to enter into this conversation is one that does touch upon the clinical aspect, but we're tying in the concept of Ori, which is our spiritual head, our Godhead. We're tying in also Iwapele, which loosely means having good or balanced character, to even gauge this conversation, because from what we've observed, some of us as a collective, is that these conversations are not even conversations that are being had. So before we can even talk about sexual preference or choice lifestyle, what have you, we have to just even be able to broach the conversation about sex, intimacy, and physical intimacy. There's also a concept or a culture of secrecy built into the spirituality. because the role of the Babalawo, which is a role of leadership, it literally means father of secrets. And this is a spiritual leader within the community that people go to for guidance, as a vessel or vehicle of guidance, of spiritual guidance, of guidance as it relates to one's destiny and spiritual path. And so when you have that built into the fabric of the spiritual system, it already creates a place of challenge, because how are you going to come in and start asking questions about who you might be sleeping with and how you might be sleeping with them and what's your sexual orientation or preference or how you like to get it, or is it, was there some type of spiritual situation that arose that meant that you needed to have a physically intimate or sexual relationship with someone in leadership, but it's secretive because, there are so many places that we need to enter the conversation. So in applying for this grant, the conversation is, okay, we have Ori, our spiritual head. We can connect that to mental health. We can enter into a mental health conversation rather safely, Then we talked about, okay, physical health, because that's not something that we talk about. So how are we caring for ourselves just on a physical level? Are we exercising? Are we, taking care of ourselves? Are we moving? Then we figured that we could tie in our sexual health, because we're talking about the mental, we're talking about the physical, so we can ease the sexual conversation in, wide frame, bring in some clinical aspects of it, because we're going to have the mental health connected with the ORI. So there's already a physical ORI clinic where we work with our community. We work with anybody that's in need of a way of clearing the mind, getting grounded in your spirituality, getting grounded in your spiritual self. So then we can begin to have a mental health conversation, and then just but ease into the sexual aspect of it and say, okay, well, we have some clinicians. Here's some information about testing, because as we talked about before in the other sessions, how the conversation about HIV, there's a mental component to it. Somebody brought up the stigma again, because there's that, mental component to it, and questioning, is it safe to share? Who can I speak to? We figure we can bridge that in this other conversation about physical health and mental health. So that's what we have so far. And I'm grateful for all these experts, in this cohort, because I'm learning a lot about engagement, because this is not a space that we have engaged before.
Okay. I'm gonna Minister White, you're on mute. You may want to unmute yourself. And then also, as we can go back to Minister White so she can just close us out with some final thoughts before the final hour is up. Mm-hmm. But this has certainly been very, very rewarding. And so again, just to repeat some of the ideas and some of the language and some of the approaches with the programs and how you incorporate spirituality. And I see you, Dr. McCrary, with your hand up, and I see Zariah. Oh, that's hands clapping. Okay. And so we mental health is an approach, empathy, clinical, which is more informative and educational, the greatest commandment, physical health, and grace. And so just before we close out, I'm going to invite Minister to kind of wrap it all up for us and bring all this thinking together, and how does this appear in the programs, and what say you? What would you say to all of these great leaders as we continue to develop these programs?
And I would speak at this point in time to Bishop Sonia, who talked about the fact that there's a lot of conversations as we're looking at words, what words may be offensive. I think that Dennis Meredith began to talk about words that some people find offensive, some words that he uses in his conversation. I just had a conversation with the church, and I used the word vagina, and she screamed and she said, there are children in here. And I thought, do they have one? what would you have me call it? But I could call it a hoo-hoo, but then would you know what I'm talking about? You have to know what I'm talking about to talk about protecting it. And so some of these conversations, Bishop Sonia, they're going to be a little hard. And I think as our esteemed Dennis Meredith reminded us, is that he has left the church, but he is, like I said, the church is still in us. And so however we're representing, even as our sister Amina talked about the work that she has to do, you also know that there are going to be some issues that you have to look at. We talked about in this grant is that there's going to be issues of homophobia. There's going to be issues of misogyny. We can try to come in the back door, but y'all know they monitor the doors we walk through. And so the thing is that we have to be very mindful of what will come up. And this is what we're asking you to do as we look at the decolonization of the body. We have to save the conversation. Some of the things we have to talk to you people. What do you call it? Because whatever you call it, I'm trying to support you as a community to protect it when you are in your places where you may not be protected. And these are the conversations that we're going to have. They can be individual conversations, but they need to be conversations that we have amongst ourselves as leaders. And they need to be conversations that we feel comfortable embracing in the invitation of doing this work. So again, we've been reminded what our task has been for the funding of this grant, to talk about HIV/AIDS in our community. And we have written grants that told us how we're going to do it. We've talked about across the board, what would be some of the barriers. And we've talked about what would be some of the solutions, that we show up in love, that we offer grace. We know there's plenty of people who don't offer any of those things, and we cannot be those things. So this is the invitation, and this is the reality of what we need to be. We've had this understanding, and these conversations will continue. This is what this cohort is for, the opportunity for us to keep building on conversations to support you to be successful in the implementations of your program. And so I thank you for your willingness to engage. There's so many places we can go, and there's so many places where we can put a pin in, and this is where we will say to be continued, because this is what this work requires, to be continued. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Can we all be
Thank
in
you.
agreement that Minister Lisa Diane White did
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Again?
Asante
Thank
sana.
you. Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you.
Asante sana. Asante sana.
Thank you so
Sana.
much. Thank you so much. Thank you
Sana.
everybody for participating again today. Thank you everybody for the great ideas. And
Reverend Bean.
So I'm sorry, Dr.
Reverend Bean.
Yes.
Yeah. I want to say thank you for such a great job of preparation. And thank you, Reverend Minister, soon to be Doctor, yes, Lisa Diane White, for the presentation. Again, I am encouraged. I'm very encouraged by the conversations that were held in this brief period of time. I have a lot to say, so I'm not going to say all that. One of the things that I seem to have gleaned from a lot of what we shared this evening was the conduit, the impact, the approach of storytelling, sharing one's own story. Yes, as I was thinking about a method that one could use when entering any community, no matter what their faith espousal may be, but with a case study, quote unquote, a story that puts the emphasis, as Minister Lisa Diane was helping us to see, on the body, as well as Dr. Sarita Davis writing about decolonizing the body, that puts the emphasis on the body. So once you have a story like Minister Lisa Diane, when you were saying at the beginning, there's a little girl in the church, and then the girls have to come up and boy, that immediately took me to a place where I could feel what a little girl may be going through. Another case of a minister, as Reverend Meredith was talking, that as Reverend, or might have been Dr. Nadine was talking, the more you all share with me the stories, that kind of put all the rationalized theological religiosity somewhere else. And I immediately engaged with you as a human being, challenged and struggled and walking through. So case method is something that they use in psychology, and we use in pastoral care. I would invite you all to think about capturing stories and using stories as a way to have conversation.
That's right.
So that it's not pointedly religious or faith, because all of that will be the context in which you are discussing. But to get people involved, and I'll stop saying this as Reverend Meredith told us, empathy. If you really want to engage someone, if and as you can pray and present so as to engender empathy, then you have a palette that you can further do conversation. Thank you. I'm going to stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well
Dr.
said. Well said.
Well said. Well said. Thank you, Dr. McCrary. And just as a reminder, I'm going to send out the PowerPoint from this presentation and a link to the video. I'm also going to include in that email contact information to Minister Lisa Diane White. She welcomes any or all of you to be in contact with her if you want to speak with her directly. As a reminder, we have 2 more sessions left before we have 2 dates in which each organization presents their program. So it's not that far away. And so if you're going to modify, change, and evolve your program to incorporate all the things that we discussed, then you ought to be doing that as of now, because time is nigh. So next week, we're going to be speaking about community program data collection and evaluation. That's next week. That is going to be very important. So you want to be a part of that. It's going to be community program data collection and evaluation. So thank you all so much. I look forward to seeing you next week. If you have any particular questions about logging on, hopefully and prayerfully everybody are getting the emails. If I don't have your email contact at this point, feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the right here in the chat real quick. And so for those of you that are participating, thank you. Have a great evening, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, Sana.
Okay. Okay. Dr. McCarry, we have one more. Wait, hold on. Hello.
Hello. Great job.
Thank you. Thank you. You finished right on time, 7:30.
Great job. Yeah, you led us. Great. Now I don't have to talk unless you got something to say. It was quite informative.
Yeah,
Amen.
it was very informative.
And there were 3 voices from 3 different quote faith communities. Really good. And I say 3. I know quote Christian. And I'm glad Sister Amina